Jesus loved to tell stories, really, really ordinary stories, but his stories always had a much deeper and more profound meaning. We've given them the kind of religious name, a parable. It just means an ordinary everyday life story which Jesus uses to illustrate a profound reality. The first half or so of Luke chapter 8, Luke, the investigator, records a story that Jesus obviously enjoyed telling, probably told it in a number of different settings and different times. It's recorded by a number of the different biographers of Jesus' life. Very ordinary story. It's about a farmer scattering seed, and inevitably some of that seed lands amongst thorns and thistles and it can't survive the competition. Other lands on hardened paths where it can't put down good roots. Others is scooped up by those birds that inevitably follow a farmer who's scattering seeds, and others falls on some really good soil which the farmer has cultivated and prepared and fertilized and made ready. And Jesus tells us explicitly that his word is like that seed. Sentence 11, he says, "This is the meaning of the parable. The seed is the word of God." The point he's making is that, like any seed, the word of God is both incredibly fragile. It could be scooped up by a bird before it's even properly hit the ground. It could be choked out by plants that have already grown and are taking all the water. It's amazingly fragile and yet incredibly powerful, laden with life. Jesus says back in sentence 8 that if it lands on the good soil that the farmer's prepared, and if it survives and starts to grow, it'll produce a crop 100-fold. Well, that's no exaggeration. Any farmer knows there's any number of crops with 100-fold yield, that one little seed can easily produce 100 of those seeds once it's grown and matured. And he's saying my word is like that. It's very fragile. It can be snatched away from a human heart very quickly. It can not get bedded in and be taken out very, very quickly. It's very fragile and yet incredibly powerful. That if the heart it lands in is good soil, that is an amazing yield it's going to produce. And so right at the end of his parable, or his explanation of his story, this is sentence 15. He says this: But the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and a good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering produce a crop. So a noble and a good heart is given a definition. 3 things make a human heart good soil, 100-fold crop soil. He says first it's that we hear the word, second we retain it, and third we persevere with it. Now, it shouldn't surprise us that if Jesus is telling an ordinary farming story, an agricultural story, he's actually chosen 3 agricultural words there. So the word hear it literally was the noise a farmer would make to scare birds away from the crop. It wasn't a particular word. It wasn't they shouted go away or stop. It was kind of a guttural a yodel that ricocheted across the fields. It's kind of been deemed the loudest voice that would echo and scare the birds away. And he uses the idea of hearing something like that. You can't miss it. It's so loud. You're really listening and you hear it. So we hear it. It's the farmer's shout. Then that word to retain is used elsewhere to describe a farmer who's breaking in a new ox, holding tight onto a rope, training an ox to pull a plough. Well, I once or twice have had to hold a full-grown bull. I remember once I was doing work experience at school. I went to work for a vet and we were measuring cows, and finally the bull came in, and it took 5 or 6 of us to kind of hold this bull in place with these fence panels. So the vet quickly got in there and measured its neck skin for some kind of, test they were doing. This thing was incredibly powerful. That word retain it describes a farmer's grip on an ox's rope. Retain that word, hold on to it. And then persevering is a word used to describe a farmer's patience, just waiting and holding out and knowing the work is happening and not trying to rush to harvest. It takes time. So Jesus' ordinary story here is incredibly helpful, helps us understand the word as fragile but incredibly powerful, but maybe more importantly helps us understand what good soil looks like, how we prepare our own hearts, maybe our children's hearts, our friends' hearts, to be that good soil. Number 1, it's hearing. It's the farmer's shout. Make sure you've heard. Number 2, it's retain. It's the farmer's grip. Hold on to it. Don't let go of that word. And number 3, it's persevering. It's the farmer's patience, knowing it takes time for that word to produce its full crop in our lives.